nasty intimacy life of Eskimos. We've all heard about the nose-nuzzling affection of Eskimos, but what else lies beneath the surface of their intimate traditions? The term Eskimo has often been used to describe various indigenous groups living in the Arctic, from Siberia to North America and Greenland. However, this generalization is considered outdated and offensive by some, as these people come from distinct cultures with rich and diverse traditions, including those related to sexuality. In many of these societies, sexuality is viewed with openness, a common feature in tribal cultures across the world. Just as in ancient Rome or among the Mongols, some Arctic tribes practiced wife exchange, a gesture of hospitality rather than indulgence, often linked to shamanistic rituals and social customs. Historically, men could have more than one wife, though only the wealthiest could afford multiple spouses. This practice wasn't far removed from those of other cultures, like the early Mormons or Muslims, where polygamy is permitted under certain conditions. A man with 2 or even 3 wives was seen as a figure of great power and respect, not just because of his household, but for his influence in the community. One of the most unique customs was the tradition of sharing wives with guests. Far from being a mere formality, refusing this offer was seen as an insult. Instead, it was considered a way to strengthen bonds between visitors and their hosts, with a symbolic exchange of trust and respect. In some communities, the dominant male could even take liberties with other men's wives, showcasing the fluidity of relationships and status within their social structure. These practices, while foreign to many outside observers, were deeply ingrained in the life of certain Arctic tribes, shaped by survival, cultural values, and their interactions with outside influences over time. Sexual customs among Eskimos peoples were more than just intimate exchanges. They were reflections of their hospitality, power dynamics, and cultural practices. In Eskimo cultures, the idea of sharing extends far beyond material goods. It's woven into their very social fabric, especially when it comes to relationships. Unlike in many other societies, women in these communities have traditionally enjoyed a significant degree of autonomy. They can voluntarily leave their husbands for another man without facing harsh repercussions, except in rare instances. Sharing is essential for survival in the harsh, unforgiving conditions of the Arctic. With men often away on dangerous hunting trips, generosity becomes second nature. Hunting companions are regarded as brothers, and just as they share food and supplies, they also share something more intimate: wives. This practice, known as wife swapping or spouse exchange, is seen as a sign of deep respect and appreciation toward those who accompany them on hunts. By offering their wives to these brothers, men are not only showing hospitality but also honoring the bonds formed in their close-knit communities. But this custom goes beyond simple generosity. Since men are often away for long periods, their friends may visit to keep their wives company, easing their loneliness. In such cases, sleeping with a friend's wife is viewed as a goodwill gesture, a way of maintaining harmony and support within the group. There is also a practice of mutual partner exchange, where 2 couples agree to swap spouses in what can be seen as a form of co-marriage rather than polygamy. However, it's important to note that this tradition isn't universal across all Arctic peoples. While some groups engage in these practices, research shows that wife swapping occurs only in certain areas and has never been as widespread as some sources suggest. In some cases, wife swapping was linked to spiritual practices, particularly the rituals of local shamans. After performing their ceremonies, it was customary for couples to exchange wives, adding another layer of significance to this tradition. The practice of wife swapping was largely confined to the community itself, though in some cases, it extended to outsiders. While foreign visitors might be offered a wife as a gesture of hospitality, this was far less common compared to the customs shared among the indigenous people. Most young women married shortly after reaching sexual maturity, and among the Inuit, a girl might even be marked with tattoo lines to indicate that she had reached the age of marriage. Despite the open nature of sexual relationships, promiscuity in these villages seldom led to exploitative practices like prostitution. While casual sexual encounters occurred, the Eskimo tradition of sharing wives wasn't rooted in sexual freedom, but in communal living and survival. Prostitution among Eskimo women wasn't a natural outcome of their social norms. Instead, the unique customs surrounding marriage and sex were guided by principles of sharing, respect, and mutual care. It was not unusual for a woman to become pregnant by someone other than her husband, but this was accepted within the community. In fact, wives and children were often regarded as communal, and the family would embrace any child born into it, regardless of the biological father. In some instances, childless families would even be given a child by another household, underscoring the importance of collective responsibility and care in their society. One aspect of Eskimo life that might seem surprising to outsiders, especially those from more conservative cultures, is the encouragement of premarital intercourse. Concepts like virginity held little significance in these communities. Parents didn't worry if their teenage children spent the night together, even if they were aware that intimate relationships might form during these encounters. This freedom was seen as natural, with mating among the youth viewed in the same practical terms as other aspects of life. Marriage in these communities wasn't just about romantic attachment. It was deeply tied to survival and practicality. A wife's ability to contribute to household tasks, such as making fur garments, butchering meat, and preparing skins, was highly valued. Her role as a mother was equally important. If a woman couldn't conceive, it was not unusual for her to return to her family so the husband could seek another partner. In these ways, the Eskimo approach to marriage and relationships reflects a pragmatic, communal mindset, deeply shaped by their environment and the demands of survival. A man has the right to take a second wife for childbearing purposes, while assigning the first wife to handle the more menial duties if his first wife proves incapable of bearing children or only bears female children. Regarding the popular Eskimo kisses, they are characterized by two individuals rubbing their noses together in a show of affection. They call the gesture kunik in their language. Family members also exhibit this, in addition to romantic relationships. Given that family members also utilize this greeting, it may or may not have a sexual overtone. This is a common practice for Eskimo mothers to brush shoulders with their kids. This greeting gesture conveys unadulterated family affection. In traditional Eskimo culture, public displays of affection such as caressing, kissing, hugging, and touching are quite common, even in front of children. Eskimo children, being natural imitators, quickly learn from their environment and often mimic the behaviors they observe, including affection and intimacy. This imitation extends to their play, especially when pretending to run a household. Even the dolls they play with are typically nude and anatomically correct, reflecting the community's open attitudes toward the human body. The harsh conditions in which the Eskimos lived led to difficult decisions, including the practice of infanticide when parents were unable to care for their children. Unfortunately, female infants were often the ones to be killed, as maintaining a proper balance of men to women was seen as essential for survival. In some remote communities, where traditional practices persisted, infant mortality rates were as high as 75%. Prior to the arrival of Westerners, the Eskimos were unaware of the genetic benefits of crossbreeding, and it was common for close relatives to marry, including cousins, uncles, and nieces, aunts and nephews, and even siblings in rare cases. Their folklore is filled with tales of young men and women who marry mysterious outsiders, often with tragic and unhappy outcomes. Celibacy was not a valued virtue in Eskimo culture, and there was little pressure to remain unmarried. Even in times of severe hardship or when women were scarce, no man, not even the poorest, was left without a wife. These customs reflect the practicality and communal nature of their society, deeply influenced by their challenging environment. The primary reason for the destruction of female infants in Eskimo communities was economic. During times of famine or starvation, fewer girls were allowed to reach maturity because males were seen as more crucial for survival in the harsh environment. To address the imbalance caused by fewer women, polyandry became a solution in some cases, where one woman would be shared by two men. This practice helped ensure that all men could have a partner, despite the scarcity of women. In the 120 Eskimo colonies studied by the author, not a single instance of celibacy was found, suggesting that celibacy was virtually unknown in Eskimo culture. Sexual relationships were considered essential for community survival, and there was little social or moral pressure to remain unmarried or sexually inactive. When it comes to same-sex relationships, the Eskimos had a distinct view that differs from modern liberal understandings. They did not have a term analogous to homosexuality or homophile in their language, but this does not mean such relationships were absent. In certain tribes, men who dressed as women and performed traditionally female tasks would have sexual relationships with other men, though they did not see themselves as homosexual in the way that modern societies might define it. In the Nunavut language, expressions for same-sex relationships are descriptive and direct. Lesbian relationships are referred to as two soft things rubbing against each other, while relationships between gay men are described as two hard things rubbing against each other. These expressions reflect the community's practical, straightforward approach to sexual relations, emphasizing the physical aspects without attaching modern labels or concepts.